Welcome to another episode of Commending and Contending, a podcast about how the gospel of Jesus encourages us to live our lives and use our words to commend and contend for Jesus and his gospel. I'm your host, Jonathan Hold, and joining me today is Naomi. G'day, Naomi.
How you going, Jonathan?
Yeah, doing really well. Thanks so much for joining me. To kick off, Naomi, where has God planted you?
Yeah, I'm in the Northern Territory. Work for the Anglican Diocese, so I work for our bishop, Bishop Greg Anderson, and I am the Dawson Children's Ministry Officer. So that means that my job is to support all of our Anglican churches as they teach the Bible to kids. And in the Northern Territory, our diocese goes from Darwin down to Alice Springs, and out into Arnhem Land, right across to an island called Groot Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria.
So you would do a lot of traveling then.
I do a bit of traveling, quite a bit actually. This year, a bit less than other years, but yeah, but I certainly do a fair bit of traveling out to the remote parishes in our diocese, as well as to our regional ones, being Catherine and Alice Springs. Yeah, so I do travel around a little bit. In fact, last weekend I did. Not the one that just went, the one before, I was in Alice Springs hanging out with them, teaching kids church and encouraging and being encouraged by them. So yeah, it's a great delight.
And how has God been encouraging you recently?
It's really interesting when you're particularly working in remote communities and with our Aboriginal churches. It's been really you often plan to go and do things when you go on a trip, but some of the often I guess it's for everyone. Often the things that you least expect are the things that are the most beautiful. So just in February, I was on Groot Island. We have a gathering called Walk, which uses the first letter of the word in the 4 different Aboriginal languages in our diocese, which is a chance for our Aboriginal churches to get together and talk with Bishop about things that are important to them. And in February, we did walk on Zoom. And so I travelled to Groot Island to just be tech support, really. And so there's 2 communities on Groot Island, and they're about 40 minutes apart. So I'd be driving out to pick people up and take them back and go back and forth. And one of our church leaders in Umbakamba, Millie Mamarika, is just such a encouraging woman. She's a good group of people on Groot have been Bible translators, helping translate the Bible into Anandeliakwa, which is their language. And Millie is just so passionate about Bible translation. So, and she's so hilarious. She's just such a firecracker in personality. She's really great, fun. And so I just got the real blessing and privilege to be able to sit alongside her and help her type up her first draft of Philippians, which she's translated into Anadiliakwa. And so it's a long process for translation, but it was just a really lovely and fun time to be able to sit with her and kind of get a little bit more of a feel for language and just have giggles and, talk about, funny things as we go through. And it's just so encouraging. She has lots of different responsibility and people, because she's excellent, and so lots of people wanting her time. So it's just really super encouraging to see her heart for the Bible being translated into language. And obviously I'm a children's ministry, and so being able to have a little window into something a little bit different, is a really great blessing, and she's super fun and encouraging.
Up Up there in Australia's north, the seasons are quite distinct, and they're often not what we in the kind of southern half of the continent experience. I'm really interested to hear a bit more about what it looks like for you in the
Mm,
changing seasons of the year and how that shapes the kind of ministry you get to do and you get to see in the
mm.
churches up at the top end.
Yeah. So, like I said, I travel right around the Northern Territory, but Alice Springs is a little bit different. It's below the Tropic of Capricorn, and so yeah, north of the tropic, it is very different. We have two major seasons with a little season in between. So we have dry season, which is what we're currently in, and then we have wet season. And in between dry season and wet season, we have this little season called the build up. And lots of people down south, I don't even know if people have actually been to the territory in wet season, but I hear a lot from people who live south of it. We call it down south, obviously south of the Tropic of, but that they think, oh, wet season, it's awful, it's so humid and it's terrible and awful all the time. Um, and I mean, my favorite season is wet season. My first thing I would like to tell everyone, wet season is amazing. So do visit the territory in wet season. You get cracking storms and the rain is warm, and if you get drenched, you dry off in like 20 minutes. It is a bit steamier, but often the temperature here in wet season can drop below temperatures, say in Sydney in summer, and it's actually quite beautiful. But it does, and so then build up is that one couple of months in between where it is really steamy, where the rain is building up but hasn't really started to fall yet, and that is when life and everything gets really hot and stinky, and everyone starts to get a bit crankier. So one of the first things I think it's important with this change in season is people's mood is really noticeably different. So, in dry season, there's a lot more energy and people are really excited, and there's, camping and lots of things to be doing during dry season. So there's a lot more of a buzz of energy. And then once build up hits, that build up is a time when everyone kind of feels hotter and crankier and has less patience, and it's not raining yet, and everyone's just hanging for the rain to come. So that can be a trickier time, and people start to slow down. And wet season itself is both physically slow, as in your body just does slow down. It is warmer in the kind of humidity. And the rain, it's wet, so there's lots of rain. And so life and ministry slows down quite a bit over that period. And partly because a lot of places get isolated by the rain. Rivers rise, roads. I mean, you might hear stories about the floodings even across Central Australia, and so places where trucks can't even get through, or the train lines are kind of shut down, which means food is a bit more scarce up here. Sorry. Yeah, so wet season is just a bit slower. And you also have the cyclone threats of cyclones and things like that as the monsoon comes through. So it is a much slower time then, and it is difficult. So even just outside of Darwin, in area kind of called Fred's Pass, which is where one of our churches is, that's kind of 30 minutes out of Darwin, and you're starting to hit the rural area. There are some people who are on property out there who will get cut off in that time for certain periods of time. And then even further along the Roper Highway, all the way to the end to a community called Numbawa, they will get cut off for about 3 months at that time of year. And even Goombalanya, which is West Arnhem Land, across Cahill's Crossing, which is the famous crocodile crossing in Kakadu, they will get cut off for a good 3 months from being able to come into town, unless you use charter planes and things like that. And then even with charter planes and moving people can be difficult because they're small planes. If storms are really bad, then you've got to have to navigate those kinds of things as well. So there's a kind of quite a ebb and a flow to the seasons in terms of people's energy, people's ability to move around the territory. And yeah, so I guess you find the dry season is just super busy. Like everything gets packed into dry season. So people are having their holiday clubs, they're having we're having our gatherings like for our clergy, for, children's ministry, for whatever we can gather together for happens in dry season. And obviously traveling out to visit, particularly our remote communities, that needs to happen mostly in dry season, unless you're going to Groote Island, which you have to fly to anyway. Um, but yeah, so a lot of the travel around the top end happens in dry season. Um, yeah, so there's lots of movement then too.
So it sounds like that's a pretty busy time, possibly really a intense ministry time with lots happening, not many breaks. Does
Yeah.
that mean they're somehow maybe in build up or wet season because everyone kind of does slow down, even ministry slows down?
Yeah, it does. It does slow down. And a lot of people go to visit their family over Christmas and things like that. So, when you're in a place like Darwin, there are some people who have grown up and live here and born here and forever Territorians. And I like to call them Darwin Gold, that they've been here forever. It's like striking gold when you find someone who's been in Darwin forever. But often people move in and move out of Darwin, which makes it very transient. So wet season is a tricky season, I think, in churches relationally because of the grief of losing people who are moving away for work, who and then you've got a new bunch of fresh faces who come, people to meet and build relationships with. So it kind of has this bittersweetness to it as well, as people leave and new people come. But that also is a huge, I guess, need to trust God, in the sense of when you see a stack of people leave your church at the end of a year, and you're waiting to see who God sends in the next year. That can come with grief and positive anticipation, but also grief and relationships changing and things like that as well. And also just that nature of having to rebuild ministries when people who are really actively involved move away. So if you're someone out there listening who thinks that life in the territory could be a good thing, then I would very much encourage people to come and move up here and try out the territory, but also, stick around for a long time if you can. It's an awesome place to live. I plan on sticking around as long as I can, as long as God has in store for me. But it's certainly an awesome place to live. But yeah, there is a lot of transience. So even if it's not ministry work, even if it's coming and working up here and being an active member of a church in the territory somewhere, that's a really key and valuable uh, ministry to have amongst people up here, because our churches are not massive, but we have lots of faithful people meeting together around God's word. And so they're very encouraging places to be. They're just not necessarily, there's not always loads of people at them. Yeah.
And it is challenging, isn't it, with that transience that happens in a place like Darwin, that people do come and go, and the sadness of people leaving, at one level, speaks to the depth of relationship that
Mhm.
Christians have with one another. That it's not just like work colleagues who move on. This is church family who you're saying goodbye to. And I think of the way that, the Ephesian elders were weeping as Paul was leaving them in Acts 20, knowing they probably weren't going to see him again until heaven. And I imagine there are some church farewells that have that kind of feeling as well. But that sense that people come and go must mean that you have to work hard on training people, but then releasing them and not feeling like God has forgotten you or let you down because he moves people on. I like the way that you talked about the anticipation of seeing who God sends us, that in many respects, God is behind that work of sending the right people. Do you find then you have to adapt ministries and change them depending on who God sends you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working over like kind of with senior ministers all around the place. So I don't see it quite the same way as our rectors would see that change. But yeah, it certainly does require flexibility, I think, is one of the key things. And the ability to not hold too tightly, like in Alice Springs at the end of the year, over 20 people left all at once. And
Wow.
if you think about, like, that's almost a church plant, right? You know, from some congregations around the country, you'd lose 20 people and you'd be planting a church.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it is really tricky, and it does need flexibility to be able to think about how you keep operating and serving the people in front of you, how you use the gifts of those in front of you to serve God, and how you work together as a family. And I think it can be tricky if you come with a kind of a standard mindset that says this is the way things must be done, and I need to fill these gaps with people. That then becomes quite stressful when you have people turning over a lot. And so, yeah, being very flexible in the way you think, well, what does God want us to do now? What are we able to do? And what does it look like for us to do that? I think it is very important and tricky. So needs flexibility and to hold things lightly. The territory, we joke about being not today, not tomorrow, territory time kind of thing. You make, got the best laid plans made by humans, but God's will prevail. And I think it's really important to have some flexibility about you when ministering in the territory, because things don't always go to plan, and you can have a great plan, but until it actually happens, who knows quite what's actually going to happen. So yeah, flexibility is one of the big things I think that's important.
Thanks for chatting with me today, Naomi.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.